My guest provided me with a glimpse at the next generation of public health leaders. Every interaction I've had with him is refreshing and inspiring. I think you're really going to enjoy getting to know him through our conversation on this episode. You're listening to the PHEC podcast, episode 423. Welcome to the Public Health Epidemiology Conversations podcast, where we have honest conversations with public health professionals who are creating meaningful impact in communities around the world. They know that the field of public health touches everything. I'm your host, Dr. Charlotte Hughes Huntley, and today we're exploring the fascinating journey of our guest and diving into another conversation that bridges different perspectives with the practical wisdom you need to fuel your impact. Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this episode. My guest has provided me with a glimpse at what the next generation of public health leaders look like, and it is very refreshing and inspiring, and I'm really excited for you to meet him on this episode. If you happen to be tuning in for the very first time, or it's been a while since you've been here, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Charlotte Huntley, and I lead an epidemiology consulting firm that supports large nonprofit organizations and community health foundations. We specialize in a variety of community assessments, helping our clients communicate their health information in plain language to their community partners, as well as the broader communities that they serve. The support we provide often falls in the category of strategic planning and sometimes capacity building, depending on the situation. Please reach out to us through our website, drchuntley.com. We'd be happy to meet with you and explore how we might be able to support your organization. And the links will also be provided in the show notes for this episode. Now, let me tell you a little bit about how I met my guest, formally introduce you to him, and then we'll continue on with this episode. I was actually in a conference. I was delivering the keynote, and he actually was at a table with his peers, and he asked a question at the end. I remember listening to his question, and he caught my attention, and I thought, oh, this is somebody I would really like to have on the podcast. He'd be a great guest. Now, that happens often. I can be in a situation, I'm interacting with someone at a conference, at a meeting, and I'm not necessarily actively looking like, could this be a guest or is potentially or not? I am just always open. And sometimes those people will cross my path. They'll stand out for one reason or another. This was a little different because I'm on the stage I led the keynote panel with a colleague, and we're looking across the room and someone's asking the question. And while I'm listening to their question, I'm also thinking, I really want to talk to this person a little bit more. I'd love to have them on the podcast. So at any rate, fast forward a little bit, we had a few conversations, a few exchanges. I talked to him during the conference and invited him to be a guest. He followed up with my team member and we got the ball rolling. And as we were preparing for this conversation that you're about to listen to, that we've pre-recorded that part of the segment. But as we were preparing for that, he reached out to my team to mention that he had listened to my episode 416. So if you have not listened to that episode, be sure to check it out. It's an episode where I talk about my son that we lost last year in a motorcycle accident. And he had listened to that episode, and he mentioned to my team that a lot of his interests were overlapping with my call for motorcycle safety. So you kind of have to hear that episode to kind of understand the gist of why he wanted to talk about it, because I was really asking for people that can help me with what to do and how to advocate. So he wanted to know if it was okay to discuss this topic during our episode, during our conversation. So that really stood out to me. Now, I was already sold. I already knew there's something about his leadership qualities. I think that's what really caught me. And those of you who are in senior level positions in your career, in your walk and on this journey, you understand what I'm trying to explain here. When you cross paths with someone who has genuine leadership qualities, some things that they're just there, they stand out to you. And I think that's what was standing out to me about this particular person, was just those qualities. There's the compassion, the caring, the concern, the leadership style, the way he even engaged with his peers in the room and how he engaged with all of us in the room at the conference. It's just something about him just really stood out to me. So by the time we had this in common and he wanted to share, well, the leadership side really stood out, that he had the thoughtfulness, the compassion, and the care to ask that question, and just a real genuine care from, thoughtfulness, I guess we could say. But when you hear that part of the discussion, I think you'll also understand what I keep talking about with this little glimpse of leadership. I honestly didn't know how I would be able to engage in the conversation. It's one thing I have to build myself up to talk about it on a solo episode, but then to prepare to have the conversation. And I didn't have too much time to stress about it. This was maybe the day of or the day before we recorded this conversation, but it was great. It actually helped me to do exactly what I was saying I needed to do in episode 416, and started me, got a little bit of forward thinking and felt a little less stuck after we were able to talk about it for a bit. So we talked about it on this episode that you're going to get to hear, but we also talked about it a bit further off camera, off recording. And it was I really appreciated the conversation. So I'm still welcoming those of you that want to hold that conversation with me. It doesn't have to be on an episode, but if you go back to episode 416, we do have a form where, you can share your thoughts with me really directly there. But back to my guest. So that is a part of our conversation. I was happy to have him share his thoughts. I really wanted to hear his thoughts and his work in this area. And it's a very different, well, not very different, just a different perspective, something to think about. I hadn't really thought about the way, what he raised in our conversation. So enough teasing about that. Let me give you a little bit more background and introduce my guest, and then I'll connect our conversation. Santiago Ojeda Sainz is a second-year MPH student at the University of Florida with a concentration in social and behavioral sciences. He has an undergraduate and research background in neuroscience and behavior, including neuropsychology and psychobiology. Santiago was the youngest youth and adult mental health first aid instructor in the country. He graduated with his bachelor's degree in neuroscience and behavior at 18 years old, educating community stakeholders, including local sheriff's offices, community services council, and local schools in Broward County. He was recently nominated to serve as the 2025-2026 University of Florida College of Public Health and Health Professions This is Public Health, or TIPH, ambassador at the national level. Santiago is also the secretary of the Public Health Student Association at University of Florida and sits on the Social and Behavioral Sciences Student Advisory Board for his program. His interests span various public health sectors, including migrant healthcare access policy, public health leadership, neuroepidemiology, motorist safety, and health reduction initiatives for substance misuse in Florida. Let's connect my conversation with Santiago right after we take a moment to thank our sponsor for this episode. Join us this November to connect with the brightest minds in epidemiology. APHA is excited to welcome you to the 2025 Annual Meeting and Expo, November 2nd through 5th in Washington, D.C. As always, APHA is diving deep into the science that drives public health. Explore sessions like tapping the potential of wastewater surveillance, advancing health equity through plant-based indices, and public health practice in sparse data environments. We'll also examine cutting-edge work in cancer epidemiology research methods and advancing low-dose radiation health effects research. And that's just the beginning. With scientific sessions, networking opportunities, and an epidemiology section career panel, you'll leave with new tools, insights, and connections to advance your work. Don't miss this chance to be part of the world's largest gathering of public health professionals. Register today at apha.org/annual meeting and use the code APHAPHEC to get 10% off your registration. Well, hello, Santiago. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, Dr. Huntley. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, this is great. We've been chatting for a while, and I decided we need to go ahead and hit record and officially get started.
Yes.
Well, it is certainly my treat to have you here on the podcast. I'm excited to have our conversation and to create this episode. I met you in Florida at Florida Public Health Association, the conference in Orlando, just a few weeks ago now, last month.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I am excited. I know that we have a lot to talk about, but why don't we just start with you introducing yourself? Tell everyone a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Santiago Ojeda. I'm a second year Master of Public Health student at the University of Florida. I have a concentration in social and behavioral sciences. My undergraduate and research backgrounds stem from neuroscience and behavior. So things like neurophysiology and psychobiology, that kind of deal. And so now into my master's, I'm looking more into the neuroepi side of things, social determinants, and all that kind of stuff. And really, I had a gap year between my undergrad and grad school where I was a mental health first aid instructor in Broward County. And that was a really pivotal moment for me in deciding to go from the wet science neuro side of things over into public health, just interacting with the community and really realizing that we can do all the research and get all the data and make the most advanced scientific sort of findings that we can. But at the end of the day, our community and our neighbors, everyone that we share this world with needs the tools now to really deal with a lot of these disparities and inequities that we see today.
That is awesome. Well, you actually are leading right up to the question I love to ask, and you touched on it already a bit. But when did you first hear or learn about public health, or first hear about public health? Do you remember?
The moment that I first heard it and my ears sort of perked up was when I started that mental health first aid job, and we started talking about local stakeholders that we could meet with. And we realized that, I looked at it sort of as a psych or a behavior related kind of job. And it was actually housed within a social services agency that ran a not for profit psych clinic. I guess that's sort of, it was a practice. So I kind of looked at it from that angle, but then I realized all the stakeholders that we're meeting with, Children's Services Council, Broward County, Palm Beach Sheriff's Office, we're looking at local schools, we're looking at our churches, we're looking at all these community stakeholders, and really I'm looking at the entire public, and so when we joined a lot of these meetings and we did these outreach events, everyone around us was really mainly a public, whether it's policy or medicine or education, everyone, their connection was public health. And so that was for me the moment that I realized that that's where I wanted to be as I continue my education, was at that population level science.
So you are social behavior sciences focused, and you've got a background in neuroscience. So is there a particular population that you're most passionate about now, or is it generally in this area of social sciences?
I've had the question before, and when I think about it, I would like to say that there is not any one specific, but really, especially recently, I've been working on this op-ed that I'm trying to get published on immigrant healthcare access. And, I was born in Mexico and I am an immigrant, and I've seen firsthand what my friends and family and neighbors have had to go through when it comes to barriers to healthcare access, et cetera. And a lot of the disparities are not investigated too thoroughly in today's literature. And so there isn't too good of a sort of defined relationship between the entire life experience of migrating to a country, especially here in the United States, and how that could impact health outcomes. And so you see phenomena develop, things like the healthy migrant effect. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's basically this phenomena that when an individual moves, let's say from Mexico to the United States, that individual on average has significantly better outcomes in healthcare access in healthcare use and just general like chronic diseases and comorbidity, all that kind of thing. And so you hear that and you think, oh, well, that's great. And that means that immigrants must be healthier, but there really isn't that much research on it. And there's kind of some back and forth right now in the literature. So that's what I'm going to be working on in my capstone for my master's, is going to be a scoping review on immigrant health and health outcomes here in Florida, and sort of what direction we need to be looking at. Because no one can really tell right now in terms of just their health outcomes, how are immigrants doing? And if they are doing significantly better, what are those factors between a native-born Mexican who comes to the U.S. and a native-born American whose parents just one generation earlier moved to the U.S.? Why are there differences in their health outcomes on average? So I would say that that's, especially in this past year since I started my master's, been the population that I'm focusing in on more and more. But obviously, with mental health first aid, we kind of take a harm reduction approach, and we're looking at entire communities, and we look at so many different stakeholders that I really enjoyed getting to work with many different populations, different ethnic communities, different professional sectors, etc. And so I think that there's a lot to be learned from looking at any different population, especially here in the state of Florida. We're so diverse.
That's really fascinating. So, will you be looking at specifically Mexican immigrants or any?
We'll definitely be looking at all different ethnicities and different countries of origin. I know that, for example, US Huff has a couple labs, and even here in UF, we have labs that work with Haitian immigrants and Latino immigrants kind of get grouped together a little bit in research sometimes just because it's such a, especially here in Florida. Right now, I'm actually working with Dr. Colin Burgos here at UF on working through this scoping review, and he does a lot of sexual health research among MSM Latino men in South Florida. And so we kind of get grouped in a little bit, but yeah, I think it's important to look at all different countries of origin when looking at these health outcomes.
Fascinating. You'll have to follow up with me and let me know about your findings. It'd be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully I'll get to finish it up in time to present at the next FPHA.
That would be great. So, are you still working as a mental health first aid instructor?
No, now that I live in South Florida originally. I moved to South Florida from Mexico, and I really never left until I started my master's here at UF. And here at UF, I'm all the way up in Gainesville, so I'm in North Florida-ish now. But back home, when I was doing my gap year, I was working in Broward County through a grant from the state of Florida that goes county to county. And I know that there's some mental health first aid programs here in Alachua, but by the time that I started my master's, I knew that I was really trying to go more into a research kind of path. And some of that time it's a full-time job, it's a full teaching job. You go into a training, it's 8 hours the entire day. And then the next day you have a whole new set of students. And so you can't really get that same schedule flexibility. And so I decided to stop that job to be able to pursue my master's.
Okay. So you're full-time. Actually, this is what, your second year? So this will be your last year?
This will be my last year, yes. And I'm currently applying for PhD programs in public health that would start next fall. So I'll have a little bit of a gap in there.
Okay. So tell us a bit about some of the other hats you wear, because I know you have some leadership roles. Like, talk to me a bit about what you're doing outside of your work on your master's.
Absolutely. So when we met at FPHA, I was representing Public Health Student Association, and that's a student association based out of the Master of Public Health program. We're actually technically a part of the program here. And what we do is we try and connect our students to different opportunities as they move throughout their masters, which can include service opportunities. So we'll host events where people can freely come. And it's not even just our master students. Really, they can bring friends and family. We get people together to try and volunteer at local programs or initiatives that promote public health. We also, for example, have the mentorship program. That's what I was presenting at FPHA. We started a mentorship program 2 years ago that currently has 40 pairs of mentors and mentees. And what that really gives our students the opportunity to experience is what it takes in the professional setting to adapt to a lot of the changes that we've seen in public health as a field. And it also gets them to be able to sort of dip their feet in the water in various different sectors of public health and concentrations and research interests, because through the advice of a mentor, students are able to kind of get a taste of that professional life in that given sector. And if they decide that they don't enjoy it or they want to focus in a different concentration or research topic, et cetera, throughout their masters, that's what we give them the opportunity to do and sort of change around and move around. But the greatest thing, obviously, is it's really a form of professional development. We're giving them that hands-on experience and mentorship and advice from our mentors who very generously advise our students and provide them the opportunities they need to get a head start, really, as soon as they leave their masters.
That sounds like a great program.
Yeah.
And what is your role there?
I'm the secretary.
Secretary, okay.
Yes, which secretary is usually a pretty flexible role, and it's definitely rings true for PHSA. I'm always kind of all over the place, whether I'm helping our president and VP organize events or brainstorming ideas with our social chair or our community service chair to come up with what kinds of events we can run. I work a lot with our faculty advisor, Lisa, or our MPH staff advisor, Lisa. She and I work together a lot with just pulling the strings together to get stuff like the Orlando trip. I mean, it was FPHA, but for us, it was like the Orlando trip. It was a really big endeavor, just getting everyone there and setting everything up. And yeah, we also do a lot of program work. So within the Master of Public Health program, for example, this past week, I spent a few days now working at a couple of our orientations for incoming students. I also got to be a panelist for incoming students at our accepted student visit day that we did late in the spring semester for students who had just heard back from the admissions board. And so we do a little bit of everything between the community, helping out the program, but really our focus is on strengthening our students and their skill set.
Do you have other roles? This sounds like it's pretty full, but
yeah. So I'm also on the SBS Student Advisory Board for my master's program. And what that is it's a board that meets on a monthly basis with the director of the SBS concentration, which is Dr. Gaya Zori. And we meet with her on a monthly basis and we just discuss the SBS concentration and where we know students are currently either struggling or facing challenges, or even teachers, if we notice things like classroom capacity compared to how much we're really filling it out. We need to get a little more space. We need a new classroom next semester for the same course, or would some courses work better if they were online? Would some courses benefit from smaller or larger classrooms, like cohort sizes? And then obviously we also talk about the content within each of the courses available through our concentration. We look at the curriculum and we kind of try and just give our director sort of a direct hint as to what it is that students need, what it is that the professors need, and what the concentration in general needs to run more smoothly or adapt to the needs as they emerge of students and teachers.
And the SBS is the social behavior sciences.
Yes, SBS stands for social and behavioral sciences.
We love our acronyms in public health.
Yes. And speaking of which, so this is a role that I'm just now coming into because my term actually just started on August 3rd, but I am also a TIPH ambassador, which means it stands for This is Public Health, which is an ASPPH, or so many acronyms, but
you're right.
ASPPH is the Association of Schools and Programs in Public Health here in the United States. They accredit universities with, the ability to teach public health programs and run graduate programs like an MPH, et cetera. And so that gives me the opportunity to be an ambassador for UF at the national level and work with all of the other public health ambassadors from their respective programs across the country. And the main goal of that ambassadorship is to promote public health both through online initiatives, like through their website and social media and all that stuff, but also especially individually sort of on campus. So I'm kind of a liaison between connecting my students in my program to ASPPH resources they may not have known about, or just general public health advocacy topics they may not have been aware of. But also I get to connect ASPPH back to my community here in Gainesville and on campus and try and promote public health on campus, which is where my motorist safety interest comes in as well, because I would like to be able to use the ambassadorship to promote safety on campus when it comes to any kind of transportation, but especially things like micromobility and motorcycles.
Well, that is a perfect segue. And I love that connection too, because I think that's what I want to be able to do as well. So some of what we had talked about before we hit record is some of you that listen to the podcast for a while are familiar with my story about my son, that my bonus son we lost last year in a motorcycle accident. And I actually had a whole episode. It was episode 416, if you're exact, on August 5th that it was released. And that was right at the 1 year mark of since we lost him in an accident. And I really, if you haven't heard that, you can go back to get all the details of the story. But I really am still in this place of trying to figure out how to advocate and what do I do. And so you heard that episode. So I love that you have this focus, but tell me a little bit about, I know we talked about this a little earlier, but for the podcast audience, a little bit about how that touched you and why that matters to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm an avid rider myself my entire life. I've been on a dirt bike as long as I can remember. I grew up racing motocross. And so I remember I got on a dirt bike before I took the training wheels off my bicycle. And obviously now I also ride on the street and share the road with a lot of drivers and see the risks that myself and other riders face on a day-to-day basis that really are preventable and avoidable. And it's exactly the way that you mentioned it earlier, in that a lot of the times, motorcyclists are getting into accidents that truly are just accidents by definition, that they are, abiding by the laws of the road, and they're wearing their gear and they're trying to be as safe as they can. And even other drivers who share the road with them, there's kind of this naivety of they are trying to be careful. No one ever goes on the road and is purposefully causing a wreck, but a lot of people don't know what to look for, how careful they really should be for motorcycles, especially at times like when riding in the highway or at busy intersections or at night or in the rain, etc. There's just so many different factors that can make riding more and more dangerous and difficult. And it's really important that from a public health lens, we look at how we can make the roadways safer for our motorcyclists. And that includes a lot of different factors. So we could look at safety features, for example, in cars. A lot of people are kind of growing a little bit careless, or they can be a little bit dependent on the safety features of their vehicle. So for example, a blind spot monitor. If you're driving and sharing the road with only cars, then that blind spot monitor is absolutely going to do its job perfectly well at seeing the cars. But when it comes to motorcyclists, we're so much smaller. We have much less surface area for that radar to pick up on us, that it makes it hard for blind spot monitors to pick us up. And so a lot of times I'll pass somebody on the road and I'll notice that many times these cars' blind spot monitors never even went off in the first place. And so, that happens all the time, where people will swerve in front of a motorcyclist and not even know it because they're so dependent on that technology. It's also an infrastructural issue. So for example, we're taught in the MSF course, which is the course that you take to get your motorcycle endorsement here in Florida. We're taught that the pressure plates at stoplights, for example, at an intersection, when you get there and you're at a red light, there's a pressure plate that senses the weight of your vehicle and prioritizes getting you that green light so you can go, especially if it's not very busy and it's nighttime. You don't want to be sitting at a light forever. But we are so light on a motorcycle. A car weighs a ton, 2 tons. We weigh, it's like a 400-pound bike and a person on it. So it's much, much lighter. And that infrastructure doesn't account for us. And so a lot of the times what we have to do is kind of put it into our own hands in a way that we really shouldn't have to, right? And so that training tells us that if you're sitting at a red light at night and it won't go green for you after 2 cycles, that you're just supposed to run the red light. And it's a little bit crazy, because you never know who is coming on one end or another of an intersection. If people are coming in too fast for you to notice, by the time you turn or go straight or do whatever, people have a really, really hard time noticing and seeing motorcycles. And I think it's really important that we look at all the different aspects. So it's the infrastructure aspect, there's a safety aspect. Obviously, there's also an awareness aspect that we should look at. A lot of people don't know that, for example, it's really important you look right, look left, look right ahead, or, look twice, all that kind of stuff. A lot of people don't really know just how many motorcyclists they share the road with. And especially, I'm not sure, Dr. Hunley, in your area, if you've picked up on it, but here in Florida, and especially in South Florida, there's been a lot of increase in motorcyclists and in moped users. So people who ride scooters around town, that's just as dangerous. And maybe even more so because it's not as common to see scooters or more moped riders using full gear the way that they should. And it's really scary to me when I see that. When I pass someone on a scooter and we're on the highway, it's like, I'm on a motorcycle, I have a full face helmet, it's DOT certified, I've got my jacket on, I've got my boots on, I've got my gloves on. And maybe the person next to me, if they're on a scooter, they've got like a backpack and a t-shirt and no helmet, maybe some sunglasses. We need to really be reinforcing some of these regulations when it comes to wearing gear and using gear. It's actually crazy. I'm not sure if you know this story, but a couple of years ago, there was a really important attorney who was fighting in Florida to lessen the restrictions on helmet wearing in the state. And so sometimes he would get people out of tickets for not wearing their helmet. And then that makes the local police not give tickets out for not wearing helmets. And so all of a sudden it kind of makes the whole issue disappear. And unfortunately, that same attorney passed away in a motorcycle accident and was not wearing a helmet. And so these are the kind of conversations we really need to be having. Same with like even among helmets, you need to wear a DOT certified helmet a lot of the time. For example, in Florida, if you're under 21 or if you have less than, I believe, $10,000 of accident liability insurance disposable, then you have to wear a helmet at all times on the road. But the DOT certification for helmets is a lot more lenient than other certification boards. So, for example, there's a board called the Snell certification, which is a much more rigorous certification process for helmets to go through. It makes it so that they have to have better impact resistance or more rotational force protection, etc. But with DOT, I mean, you can go out, I'm sure you've seen guys on a Harley out there wearing just a half helmet. It's just like a bucket on their head. It doesn't protect their face or their neck or their jaw or anything. And it's, when you're getting into collisions, it doesn't have to be on the highway. You don't have to be doing 100 miles an hour to be in a life or death situation on a motorcycle. It's just going down the street to the Walmart or getting gas or whatever it may be, 10, 15, 20 miles an hour is enough. And you don't have airbags or seatbelts. And so, yeah, it's really important that we look at all these aspects when we're designing policy and interventions. And when we're trying to spread the word, it's not just a rider problem. It's not just the drivers they share the road with. It's everything. It's the infrastructure. It's the gear. There's so much work that needs to be done to make the roadway safer for motorcycles. And especially now at a time where we see this increase in usage of either motorcycles or mopeds, this is a whole sector that really isn't investigated too well. And I think we're going to start to see a lot of overlap in the coming years with other forms of micromobility. So, for example, e-scooters and e-bikes. We went from, in 2016, I think globally there were 17 cities who had, e-scooter or shared moped kind of program in their city. And now it's like over 220. So now we have an explosion of so many people here. I see it on campus every day. More and more people are getting around on e-scooters or e-bikes. And these are forms of transportation that are a lot more dangerous than people really understand. You can, for a few bucks, rent a scooter and all of a sudden you're going 20, 25 down the sidewalk or down the bike lane, and you don't have to get a helmet to rent one of those scooters, right? It's just on the side of the street and you pick it up, and people don't realize, again, you don't have to be going over 20 for it to be a dangerous situation. 5, 10, 15 miles an hour when you're on the concrete, when you're on the road, it's already a dangerous situation to be in, especially if people are getting around at night. So it's not just motorcycles. I think a lot of these same safety concerns and this need for the public health lens to inform those industries on improving the resources and the gear, making it more affordable. You can buy a moped for $1,000 here in Gainesville, secondhand. And I wouldn't let a friend get on a motorcycle if I didn't know that they had one of the best helmets around. And helmets can cost hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars, $800 for a really nice helmet. But you can get a DOT certified helmet for $100. And it's like, where are we really educating riders and everyone that they're sharing the road with in terms of how safe is it? Do they know, what is the perceived susceptibility? What is the perceived risk? Do riders really know? Does the training really inform them before they get that license? Does it really inform them just how much risk they're getting into when they're doing these trainings? I think these are all things that could use a lot of development and investigation.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. You give me a lot to think about that I hadn't even considered on top of the motorcycle, but you're right. The scooters, the electric bikes, there's just so much. And you mentioned that you want to incorporate this into some of your work through your ambassador role. Is that right?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, it just started a couple of weeks ago and we're still kind of in the orientation process. The term lasts a year, so I'll be an ambassador through next year. But the ASPPH TIPH ambassadorship is kind of giving me the tools to be able to promote different public health concerns on campus. And college campuses is one of the few places where you see almost everyone riding a scooter here in the US. There's a ton of mopeds here on campus and not a lot of people are wearing helmets. There's a ton of e-scooters here, tons of e-bikes. Not a lot of people are wearing helmets on campus. And I know UF campus alone, we've had fatalities just from simple avoidable accidents on an e-scooter or on a moped on campus roads. And so these are things that we really need to take a look at and say, our students matter. We want them to be getting to class on time and safe. So how are we letting them know of that? And so I would like to bring some kind of campaign together advocating for, our moped students, our e-scooter students, our skating students, our e-bike students, getting everyone at least showing them the information, helping them understand that a helmet saves a life a lot more often than they think.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate what you're doing. Definitely keep me updated on that and let me know if there's anything I can do to support you in this.
Okay, absolutely. I will definitely let you know. Thank you.
And thank you for just talking about that with me. I'm still trying to figure out where I'm stepping in and what I can do. I'm still trying to make sense of it. So I welcome more conversations as people are listening and thinking about that. I want to be cognizant of time, and I've really enjoyed hearing from you and hearing what you're doing and where you're wanting to go. I think anyone who, and I said this to you all, you're in your group in Florida, anyone who is choosing public health to enter into this field, and you have all the reasons to change majors and focus. You have a lot of really good reasons to change, but you all are locking in and choosing to do this work. We need you in public health, and I want to be able to support you. I hope that, my audience is listening and will want to connect with you and on LinkedIn and continue to support you and get to know more about what you're doing, as well as any other, like I said, you are our future leaders in public health. So it's important to support you. And we're going to have links to connect with you in the show notes. I'm trying to think here, what is a good, because I have so many other questions that I want to ask. I have to kind of narrow it down to one as we wrap up.
I just wanted to add in really quick. Thank you for acknowledging that. And what I want to say is my e-board and I, you met them as well at the FPHA conference. The takeaway that we've sort of gotten from the entire political climate recently and sort of the divestment, sort of the cuts in funding and job losses, et cetera, what we know to be true is that public health isn't going anywhere, that we can't go anywhere. This is a field that will always matter. And it's the kind of field where you have to care so deeply because you're going to run into so many barriers. I mean, it's a field at the end of the day about tackling those barriers, right? So you have to be tough, but most importantly, you have to really care and love your community and everyone around you. That's why even in the face of all this ambiguity and these concerns that have been risen lately in the political climate, we know we're not going anywhere at the end of the day.
That is wonderful to hear. I know it really warms my soul. I'm sure my my audience is feeling renewed. So now you've actually inspired my last question for you, and it's not one of my typical questions. I want to know, how can we, the more senior public health professionals who may be a little tired or a little frustrated, we're still fighting, we're still here, but how can we support you and your colleagues and your classmates that are right there with you?
One way that I can tell you for a fact is a great way to support us is that PHSA mentorship program, for example, any kind of program or initiative where you can get that one-on-one collaborative and mentorship focused conversation going with students is extremely important. We're going into a field that is pretty abruptly changing day to day, and especially in recent times. And that can be intimidating for a student who is just getting into the field, right? Someone who chose their MPH, they might have been pre-med in their undergrad or they had a different major. Almost all of the people on my e-board didn't even have a public health major before they came into their Master of Public Health. So we're so new to the field that it can be really scary for students to see all of this turbulence and to see all of this conflict. And so one thing that I can definitely say is mentoring a student, supporting them, going to events for local student organizations, etc. I will definitely send you a link to our mentor sign-up form. And so that way anyone listening can join in on our mentorship program and do that work that needs to be done, for our field to preserve and maintain the people that we have and that we love and that we need in this field to be able to transfer those skill sets to the rising public health practitioners and leaders, etc.
That's wonderful. And we'll definitely do that. We'll make sure that we get that added onto the show notes page. And yeah, I'll ask my listeners to look for that. And if you can, what is the time requirement for a mentor?
There really isn't much of a time requirement. We keep it really flexible because we have some pairs of mentors and mentees who like to even collaborate on work or in projects, etc. And they see each other very often. And sometimes it's kind of just a check-in every couple of months. The student will say, this is where I'm at. These are my interests. These classes have informed my recent interests, and this is kind of the direction I'm going in. And then the mentor will say, well, here in the professional setting, this is how we're applying that same information. This is what it would look like to work through this information on a day-to-day basis. Give them that taste, and the student gets a chance to say, wow, I really like that. Or, maybe I'm best suited going in another direction here in public health. It's really just about informing the student and in a way, really also inspiring the mentor and keeping public health going. We all need to help each other. I know we absolutely felt that environment so strongly at FPHA. It was such a wonderful conference and everyone was so kind and everyone is always supporting each other. So all I can really say for professionals is to continue to support the rising public health practitioners and our public health students.
Wonderful. Well, Santiago, thank you. This has been a really warm conversation. I enjoyed meeting you in Florida and this conversation continuing, and we definitely have to keep in touch.
Absolutely.
Before you know it, you'll be at graduation and next step. So
oh yeah,
definitely keep in touch and just appreciate you. This has been a fabulous conversation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this conversation has been great. In my book, we're friends. So
that's right.
Thank you so much for having me and inviting me. Your questions have been great and giving me the platform to talk about a lot of these things about the PHSA mentorship program, motorcycle safety advocacy, all these things, and especially how students can approach and how professionals can approach the turbulence in the field right now. These were all great topics. So thank you so much for having me.
I really hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as we did. I look forward to keeping in touch with Santiago and following his journey. I'm sure we'll have him back on the podcast again in the future for updates, especially as he continues to navigate the journey of leadership in public health. I encourage you to connect with him and learn more about the opportunities that he discussed on this episode, especially the call for mentors. When you reach out, be sure to let him know that you heard him on this podcast episode. I'm sure that'll make his day. You can find the links to connect with Santiago on the show notes page for this episode. Now, the show notes page for this episode, which is episode 423, can be found at phecpodcast.com. Once you're there, just navigate to episode 423 to find the show notes. One more thing before we go. Remember that our podcast has a new app where we can continue the conversations from episodes like this with public health professionals from around the world. You can download the new PHEC Podcast Community app in Apple or Google Play Store. You can also find the link on the show notes page for this episode as well. All right, everyone. Until next time, have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you for listening. The show notes page is where you'll find links to everything we discussed in this episode. To find the show notes for all of our podcast episodes, just visit phecpodcast.com.